Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is a screencast-o-matic presentation and recording for the part of the lesson that has us looking at the unit notes for the electoral process. For this part of the lesson, I kindly ask that you open up to today's lesson and get ready to fill in any of the content that corresponds to your notes in this presentation. Remember, all you have to do is simply fill in the blanks and then answer any key concept questions that happen to appear. Also, please remember that you can replay any part of this presentation that you might need for detail or clarity later. Let's go ahead and get started. The electoral process, how we pick a president of the United States. In a nutshell, this is the basic diagram or infographic that I'll reshare with you again on Google Classroom about how this process is actually done. As you can see here, this might be better related to the process or the experience of running a marathon. It is a long process. Some American citizens who've been voting for many years might say that this is even a messy process. We've seen some very contested elections, some very heated elections in our previous time here. So in many ways, understanding the electoral process not only helps us understand how to pick a president, but also, of course, the role that we play in this historic democratic process too. So let's go and get started. And here are the four main stages of selecting a president. First here for your notes is caucuses and primaries. So we're going to talk about how we dwindle down the field from a wide pool of candidates into one person. And then, of course, it's the nominating conventions, followed by the general election, and then followed by the electoral college. So let's go ahead and understand more about these steps in order in how we select a president of the United States of America. The first step here is to announce a candidacy and organization. Many candidates who want to run for president have to launch an exploratory committee first. Candidates officially enter the race to win the presidency. They campaign, and they actually organize this campaign to be big so that they can, of course, coordinate events. They network and in many ways put together a series of workers and volunteers at the federal, state, and local level. And these people make phone calls. They, of course, engage in publicity events. And these planners, of course, do in fact combine to form different events that basically broadcast and advertise the candidate's message. They also, of course, account for the created future of fundraising. And so in many ways, money is really important for campaigns. A good sign of understanding whether or not a candidate will be successful is understanding how much money they have. If they have a fair amount of money, they'll probably do pretty well. And the more money they get, the more that people and donors might believe in them and their chances of actually winning. So, with primaries and caucuses in mind here for stage one, the purpose of this stage is the process to select a single nominee from a pool of candidates for President of the United States. Now, both parties engage in this process, and in many ways it's really important. Sometimes this process takes a matter of a few months, sometimes it's decided pretty quickly, based off of the way that the electoral results come in, but in many ways, understanding this process helps us pick the best person for our parties to represent us in the future. So what are caucuses? Caucuses are basically closed meetings of party members in each state. Delegates select the party's choice for a presidential candidate. Now, this system is currently only used in 6 states, and many people might call it, old and outdated. The Iowa caucus, however, is the first primary and caucus that takes place. If you look here at this diagram at the bottom, this is basically what a caucus is. People might enter a room and, of course, be persuaded or dissuaded to go to one side of the room and then vote for that person. And that vote gets translated into an actual vote later on. In many ways, this is a free and open democratic system. However, please keep in mind that in the last year, during the Iowa caucuses, there were some problems there with the technology that was used in tallying the result. So I do find that to be quite compelling. The Iowa caucus often gives candidates lift. If they win, other people might say, well, this person actually has a chance of winning. However, before they win, these candidates actually have to go to Iowa and campaign hard. This is what this political cartoon basically is. In many ways, these candidates might show up and show out at the Iowa State Fair. They might go to different schools and events to basically make themselves and their faces known in the heart of America. Another thing about the Iowa caucus that's really important is that it's the first major electoral event in the election process. Candidates campaign in Iowa way before the actual general election takes place. Now, the ads that are put there and the paid staffers and the publicity events that are launched there do in fact try to get as many voters as possible to care about their candidacy. And like I said before, the winner of the Iowa caucus has served as an indication of who will be successful in other primaries and then also maybe even be the party's official nominee later down the road. One thing to note about the Iowa caucuses is that if you lose and lose big or just don't do as well as your campaign thought you would have, many candidates do drop out. The reason why they might drop out is because they might see, quote, the writing on the wall, end quote, and realize that they may not have a shot at actually winning the nomination in the end. Let's talk about primaries, though. Primaries basically work like this. Presidential primary elections are special elections in which voters select candidates to be the party's nominee for the president in the general election, if you can see that down there. Basically, primaries are special elections that allow for people just to go to the polls and vote for the best person. In many ways, they're more simple and more refined than caucuses. The primary season lasts from about January to June of an election year. In case you're wondering who decides, it's the state party organization, for the most part. They decide the rules for the primaries in the particular states. There are two different types of primaries. There's closed primaries and open primaries. And in many ways, these two types of primaries help dwindle down the choice of potential candidates to be that party's nominee. Let's talk about closed primaries for a moment. In closed primary systems, voters may vote in a party's primary only if they are registered members of that specific party. So, for example, this is the type of primary that Pennsylvania has. If my dad is a Republican, he is only able to vote for the Republican nominee or candidates in the Republican Party. So he cannot be devious and vote for the weakest Democratic link on the other side to try to hope that they win and then move on. That's not how that works. Other states do have different types of primaries, and they are called open primaries. These are a registered voter may vote in any party regardless of his or her own party affiliation. So in certain states, actually, that's pretty much what might happen. You might have free open reigns to vote for whoever you want. If you're a registered Democrat, you might be able to vote for a Republican if you really want to. And also, like I said before, sometimes people might use that opportunity to sabotage the other party to put forth a weak candidate. If you look here at this map, you can see the different types of primary systems that we have across our land. And then if you look at this map, you can understand a little bit more about the types of primaries that we have between open, closed, and semi-closed, which we'll explain a little bit later in a different lesson. There are states that are able to actually change their primary system too, by the way. As I said before, many states are shifting against or away the caucus system. Let's take a few moments to talk about the New Hampshire primary. This is the first primary of an election year. It takes place in February 11th, 2020, this past year, and basically it's focused upon the candidates and how they differ from one another. Now, the reason why New Hampshire is really important as differed from Iowa is that it's a northeastern New England state. Many media actually flock to New Hampshire to try to cover the candidates on their campaign trail. Early success in these contests, like in New Hampshire, might mean that they might perform well to continue on the race. As said before with Iowa, in New Hampshire, if you do not do well here as the first nation's first in the nation primary, it's probably writing on the wall that you should probably drop out. Most candidates do in fact drop out if they do not do well in New Hampshire. Something interesting to note about New Hampshire too is that the voting demographic is drastically different here, and so too are the values and ideologies of the voters themselves as well. Here are some other important dates that you guys should keep in mind for the future. So Nevada actually has their caucuses in February 22nd of this past year. South Carolina had their primary later, and then later on, between March and then June, all other states had their primaries too. Pennsylvania's primary specifically is Tuesday, April 28th, and in many ways, Pennsylvania is sort of in the middle range of where all the states are. But different states can advocate for better placement in the primary season to decide early on who the nominee should be of that party. As we continue to talk about primaries here, let's focus on Super Tuesday. Super Tuesday is a special event where basically most states hold their primaries. In 2008, for example, states realized that the sooner they go, like I said, the more say that they have over who gets nominated. Both the Democrat and Republican parties have the earliest date for which a state can have its primary, and they try to advocate and compete for one another for the earliest date. Many states have had their primaries on this date, Super Tuesday, and it pretty much becomes blatantly clear in most election years who the nominee is going to be of that said party after Super Tuesday. So this is a big media event, and big networks like CNN, MSNBC, and Fox do cover it pretty heavily. Also, in regards to Super Tuesday, the reason why it became known as Super Tuesday is not just because of the sheer excitement around it for all parties and candidates, but the fact that most experts predict that this date would decide the nominee early. And so once the dust settles after Super Tuesday, many people say that the race is on. It should be noted here that this is not always the case. For example, in 2008 with Hillary versus Obama and 2012 with Romney versus Santorum, the winners after Super Tuesday weren't quite so clear. In fact, the primary season in many ways did launch all the way till June until the nominee became a little bit more clear and defined. Now, once again, the importance of early caucuses and primaries can't be overstated or understated, but these states are small, but they play a big role in the whole grand scheme of things. Yes, they do not decide who is the nominee for each party, but in many ways they decide who is the nominee, and they significantly narrow the field of the candidates too. So while you guys fill in those blanks there, let me digress for a quick moment. The fact is that primaries and caucuses give us a choice and a chance to actually decide who's going to be the nominee in the end of who we vote for. So to kind of flip the script for a moment, if you've ever wondered why in this last election we ended up with Trump and Biden at the tops of their respective tickets, in many ways we have to look at our primary system. I don't know if you guys remember this, but there's actually, I think, 22 candidates who were running against Biden for the Democratic nominee, and he was the last man standing. So understanding how this process works will help you as a young voter understand more importantly how this process affects you. Please proceed to the next part of the presentation.